His presentation to this year's conference is about how strong winds negatively impact our buildings and what we can do about it. Please welcome Arizona Adam.
I told myself that I wasn't going to be nervous this year, but I was nervous that I was lying to myself, and I was. I just peed myself a little. I was originally going to title this "Wind It Sucks." That's not exactly accurate, and I like to think I'm a little above that sort of lowbrow humor, so I went with the more accurate, more sophisticated "Wind It Blows." Let's talk about what an emergent phenomenon is. Yes, it is getting that nerdy that fast. This will be helpful as we move through this. So an emergent phenomenon. Water is wet. Wow, thank you, Adam, brilliant. What I really mean to say is water is wet. H2O is not wet. There's nothing wet about an H2O molecule, not a single one. You have to stick billions and trillions of them together and create liquid water, and then you get what we perceive as wetness. That's an emergent phenomenon. Consciousness is the same way, just thinking. You know, brain is made up of all sorts of proteins and lipids. I don't know, I'm not a brain scientist. But the point is, it's a lot of stuff, and you have to stick billions and trillions of those cells together and pump electricity through them, and then you get thinking, for some of us. I think of the wind as the same type of thing because the wind is air, and air is a lot of stuff. It's mostly nitrogen, roughly 20% oxygen, 1% or less of miscellaneous gases, neon, helium, hydrogen, carbon, methane. I just like to show off how many gases I know. By the way, did you know that, whoops. How do I get the laser on this thing? Oh my gosh, I'm ruining my own jokes. Did you know that krypton is actually a real gas? I swear that's not just a Superman joke that I slipped in there. It's true. So what actually causes the wind? The simplest explanation is it's just cold air from above, falling down because it's denser and heavier, and it's pushing the warm air up and out of the way. And that's wind in a nutshell. But actually, this is wind in a nutshell. It's like, yeah, I'm in a nutshell. What you gonna do about it? Wind has a bad attitude. So, with this in mind, how wind is created, in our climate, we don't have a lot of grass on the ground, and we don't have a lot of tall trees to shade the ground. And the ground is mostly just, rocks and sand. And it's very sunny here most of the time. So the sun heats up the ground rapidly, and in turn, the ground rapidly heats up the air right above it. And it makes the air warmer, which makes it thinner and lighter and weaker, and then the heavier, denser air above just breaks it, like something falling through a floor that can't support the weight. I suspect that's why it's quite windy in this region often, and why it tends to be windier as the day goes on. Not always, but that's usually the case. As it heats up, we experience more wind, so we can kind of predict when it's going to be very windy. Now this is one of my big pet peeves. Hot air does not rise. I know everybody says that, but that's not true. Hot air doesn't rise. Cold air sinks, pushes the hot air up, and the hot air floats on the cold air. And whenever I bring this up, people think I'm splitting hairs, like, Adam, what's the difference? Doesn't matter, it's the same thing. But there is a fundamental difference that I think is important for us to know, especially as builders, so that we don't do things expecting magical stuff to happen. So every year, usually during the summer, I see a lot of people doing things in an effort to cool down their house. And they're doing it on the concept that the hot air is going to rise. Because when we say hot air rises, it sounds like it just does it all by itself. No, you need cold air to come in and displace it. And it needs that cold air to sit on top of. So if it's hot outside, the air, and the air in your house is hot, the hot air in your house ain't going anywhere. It's just sitting there. You can open a loft window, you can vent your attic. It's not gonna do that much unless you also have a cold air intake and a cold air supply. So, why is the humble chest freezer superior to even the most modern upright refrigerator? Because when you open the doors on the fridge, the cold air literally spills out onto the ground like water. When you open the lid on the chest freezer, the cold air just sits there like water. It's really hard for us as visual creatures to understand things we can't see, and we can't really see the air. We can't even really see the wind, we only see the effects of it. So to visualize it, I think it helps to just imagine what liquid water would do. Because usually they behave the same way, it's just one is in a different phase and we can't see it. Here's a picture of my backyard from a distance, so to speak. So I live in a mountain valley, and I live on a foothill that's pretty close to some really big hills. And the wind, the air, falls down those hills like water, just like a torrent of water coming down the hills. So if you live in a place like this and you're also close to big hills or mountains, expect it to be gusty from time to time. You're gonna get hit with some really big gusts of wind because it will fall down those hills and pick up momentum. This is a dust devil. Sorry about the blurry image. That's a screenshot my wife recorded on her way home one day. Yeah, you don't want that hidden in your house, but you also don't have a choice in the matter. So expect something like that to hit your house and build that way, even though it might not. It could. The first year we lived out here, I saw a much, much smaller dust devil run through one of my neighbor's properties, and it took the roof off one of their utility buildings. And I could tell you a lot of stories about dust devils, but the point is, they are common in this area, and they range from harmless to destructive. So right at the beginning of this year, we were hit by a really big windstorm. The gusts were on par with a Category 1 hurricane. They ranged from 70 miles to 80 miles per hour. And the damage was similar to the wind damage from a Category 1 hurricane. I know this because I lived in Florida for over 20 years. This was a weird wall I was working on. Ironically, one of the reasons I was building it was to create a windbreak in front of the house. So don't say nature doesn't have a sense of humor. That section that got knocked over there, that was 24 feet long, and it weighed 5,000 pounds. And you can see that there are, I had concrete in the footers. You can see where it took the ground out with it. It was so heavy that when I saw the storm coming, I thought, it'll be fine. And then when the storm got there, I was like, it's not gonna be fine. And yeah, the whole thing got knocked over in unison just all at once. Like it wasn't even there. And I'm putting an emphasis on this because, in my opinion, the wind is really the most destructive force that all of us have to deal with. I know last year I said water is the #1 killer of buildings, and that's technically true. But how does the water get into the buildings? Mostly through air leaks and wind-driven rain. And if we think about most, events that destroy buildings, the wind is playing a role. Hurricanes, tornadoes, derechos, even the wildfires this year in LA. What exacerbated those fires and made them so bad? It was unusually strong gusts of wind coming off the coast. And there are certain things like earthquakes, but we don't all have to deal with earthquakes, right? We all have to deal with the wind. I'm rebuilding the wall. Now it's just double width concrete block with masonry cores, which means I'm filling those cells with concrete. So practically a solid concrete wall. I think that will hold up, fingers crossed. The house held up just fine, and this is why. So these are photos from a couple of years ago when I was framing the house. I'm using these old photos so you can clearly see the framing. Multi-ply studs, so those are all 3-ply studs. Joinery at the roof, so the rafters are jointed into the studs. I've got extra 2x4s on the rafters, turning those into structural beams. Notice the strapping going over the roof rafters. I I've been mocked for this framing a little bit, but hey, that's the internet. It looks very weird to a lot of people. And even though I did design the frame, I did not invent these techniques. If you go to a coastal area where they build out of lumber, but they also have to contend with strong winds like the coast of New England, you'll see framing like this. You'll see multiply studs, you'll see strapping on the roof, usually on the ceiling as well. This gives you optimal shear strength, and it's better than just blocking alone. And I can tell you that building, it doesn't shake, it doesn't rattle, it doesn't rack, it doesn't budge an inch. I've been inside of it through a lot of big storms. It does not budge. You don't have to frame like this to survive the wind out here. You can frame much more lightly, but your building might shake and rattle and stuff like that. And it's usually a little unsettling when that happens. Here's a shot of the outside of the house from a couple months ago. Two things I want you to take from this. Number one, and most importantly, the low profile. So it's much wider than it is tall, so it can't be tipped over. Also, the strapping that I'm adding there. Now those are battens for a rain screen, but you can imagine the extra shear strength it's adding to a building that already has exceptional shear strength. And in this climate, we can actually get away with horizontal battens. You can't really do that in other climates because of the water. You have to go vertically or diagonally or create a lattice. But out here, we can just do 2x4s horizontally. Now we'll talk about building shapes a little more. So low profile cuboids and domes. That's actually a house I built up north last year. That's a lie. I got that picture off the internet. It's probably AI for all I know. You could argue that a dome is the best shape for a house. The only thing that might be better is a sphere, but those are really hard to build, and that's why we don't see them unless you're at the happiest place on earth. But domes are quite achievable and excellent wind resistance, and they come with a lot of other benefits like water shedding and good thermal performance. Cuboids, over here on the left, just basic squares and rectangles. Those are even easier to build. And again, if you do it with a low profile, you'll have plenty good wind resistance. But we don't want to build big, tall towers. Especially since I don't think most of us, if any of us, are structural engineers. I just pretend to be one on YouTube. Now this is definitely AI, but it's a beautiful fake house. And I love a good A-frame. This is also great for wind resistance because your roof can't get blown off. Also not too difficult to construct. The only problem with shapes like this, these triangular shapes, is that you do have a very low volume to surface area. So you have more surface area on the outside than volume on the inside. That's not good for thermal performance, but you can mitigate that. For example, I would put rigid foam underneath that metal siding, and that would give you pretty good thermal performance. So I wouldn't let that stop you, I'm just letting you know in advance. Different roof styles. So any of these can work as long as you build them well. People figured this stuff out a really long time ago. There are only a couple I don't like, but not for wind reasons. I don't like the butterfly and I don't like the M shape. I actually do think they're ugly, but the main reason I don't like them is because we don't want to direct water towards the center of the building. But yeah, other than that, any of these can work just fine. There is a roof type on here, or a roof type that's not on here, which is the roof I put on my house, which is a parapet roof. So that's a flat roof with a short wall around it. You often see those on commercial buildings. Again, in this climate, we can actually get away with a parapet roof. Most builders hate them because in most other climates it just rains too much and they're prone to leaking and they're very hard to make watertight. But it's a lot more forgiving out here. You still have to make it watertight, but you're a lot less likely to have big problems from water damage. And interesting things happen with the wind when we're talking about parapet roofs. For example, as this diagram shows, when the wind hits a corner straight on, it creates a vortex. And that is a big, strong tornado that will pick your house up and carry it away like the Wizard of Oz. I'm lying.
It's not going to happen. But those vortices, they're actually quite benign. They won't really do any damage. But if you put stuff on your roof, and people like to put things on a roof like this, they're going to get swirled around and maybe carried away by the vortices. So something to consider. Another interesting thing that can happen is the wind, if it's all moving in one direction and it's raining, it will push the water on your roof all to one side and hold it in tension, which is one more reason why it's very important. If you build a roof like this, don't make it perfectly flat. You've got to have some low slopes leading to one singular point. But there are some really good benefits when it comes to the wind and a parapet roof. Again, number one, your roof can't get torn off. That's just not going to happen. And number two, if you have a high parapet wall, it's going to block a good portion of the wind from actually hitting your roof deck, which takes wind pressure off of the deck, so it's a lot less likely that your roof is going to pop off or cave in. Long overhangs. Lots of builders like long overhangs, and I get it because it's like putting an umbrella on your building. Protects the upper wall from water damage. I don't think they're necessary in this climate because it's a mostly dry climate. And you're presenting yourself with an engineering challenge when you use long overhangs, because you're basically putting a little airplane wing on the roof that the wind can use to lift your roof off. And this is not just paranoia. I personally know people that this has happened to. So, my advice is, make your life easy and just skip the long overhangs, unless you just really want them. Let's talk about wind washing. So in building science, we call wind chill on a building wind washing. We all know what wind chill feels like. The same exact thing happens to buildings and everything. When wind hits a structure, when it hits your house, it knocks heat energy off the house. So if it's a very cold day, but it's also very windy, your house is going to lose heat faster. And if you don't have a really good air seal, as this diagram illustrates, the wind will also blow through your walls and other parts of your assembly, which will also just speed up the cooling down process. So the lessons are, we want to have really airtight buildings, and if it's a cold and windy day, know that you're probably going to need a little bit more fuel to heat your house that day, because you will lose heat faster. Rain screens. So, I talked about this a little bit last year. You can use a rain screen with almost any kind of cladding. The only exception is lime plaster, but you can use a rain screen with wood siding, stucco, brick, and there are lots. Almost just fell off the stage. And there are lots of ways that you can make a rain screen, but the basic concept is that you have an air gap, a small little air gap between the cladding and the rest of the building. And that's why they also call this a pressure screen. So that air gap behind the cladding neutralizes the pressure from the wind. So when the wind drives rain through your cladding, when the water gets on the other side, it just drops straight down because it doesn't have the wind pressure driving it anymore. And so even though it doesn't rain a whole lot out here, but it is very windy, that's one of the reasons I still advocate for a rain screen. And this will also help with reducing wind washing, because you still want to have an air barrier back there, but you've got another layer of defense before the wind even gets to the air barrier. All right, so I talked about a lot of negative aspects of the wind. Is there anything positive we can do with it, put it to our use? And the simplest thing we can do to put it to our use is just cross ventilation. So just windows on opposite sides of a room. If you've got a window on the south-facing wall, put a window on the north-facing wall. And then anytime you want to draft, just open the windows. And if it's even just a little breezy, you'll get a really good draft. And this really accomplishes what we're after when it comes to natural ventilation, because what this does is it actually moves the air through the building. So we don't want to just move air around inside of the building. That's a convection oven. That'll just heat the building more evenly, it won't cool it down. And if you just put a big hole in your roof and hope that the air is just going to magically rise out on its own when it's hot, I'm telling you, it doesn't work that well. It just doesn't. Now you can cross ventilate from bottom to top, and that can work, but it still does not work as well as just this horizontal cross ventilation. And I can tell you this with confidence because I have one house that's like this, and I have another house that's not, and the difference is huge. The house that's not like this was kind of based on that premise that, well, hot air rises. So I'll make it 2 stories and I'll put a window up in the loft, and whenever it's hot, I'll just open that window and the hot air will just zip out. It doesn't. It really did not work well at all, and I actually had to install floor vents, several floor vents in the floor to get that cross convection moving from cold air underneath the building up and pushing the hot air out. And on that note, I think that is the end. Do I have time for any questions?
You have 10 minutes.
Oh, wow.
We should move you back.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm a wiener. Any questions? Yes?
Any idea what creates dust devils and stuff?
Yeah, it's just the wind. It's just a cyclone picking up the dirt and the debris. Yeah. Because I mean, it's very sandy and dusty out here, so.
Yeah, I just, I can see wind blow this way, but the sea start whirling. I just never.
Yeah, it's just when a cyclone forms, and I'm afraid I don't know the exact science of how cyclones form, especially like out in the open desert.
Do you do anything from a landscaping perspective to assist you with challenges?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot I wanted to put in this presentation that I didn't because I was afraid I'd run over time. So, yeah, windbreaks are a really good idea, and I mean, there are certain species of tree like Italian cypress that can grow quite well and quite tall out here. My only advice is if you're going to use trees or shrubs to create a windbreak, keep them about 15 to 30 feet at least back from your house because you don't want them to turn into a fire hazard, yeah, or to fall on your structure. A general rule with trees or anything tall is that it should be, the height should also be the distance from where it could fall and hit your house. But there are other things you can do, I mean, like concrete block walls. You could do cob walls with stucco if you've got the back for that. And you know, even just a 3-sided steel carport could be implemented nicely as a windbreak. I mean, you get a big one of those and you put it next to one side of your house, and that side of the house will be pretty well shielded. Yes?
I built a carport, maybe another one at some point. I've got metal sides. I left a gap on the bottom and a gap at the top. And it's probably a 15-degree slope on the roof, just all coming down to one side.
Okay.
So as I was building it and putting the metal up, the question I kept asking myself was, airplane wings work with the slope, you know, wind coming up, going up. I don't have a lot of slope. Am I better off putting that gap at the top and the bottom to let the air pressure relieve itself? Or some people have said, no, you need to keep it solid so the wind just goes over and around.
Well, something I was going to talk about is called the canyon effect. And so you do want some pressure relief because when air gets funneled into a tight spot, so when it's like blowing through your carport, it's going to intensify. If you had a back wall on it, it might, you know, push the carport back. I think you're doing the right thing by having some relief on the bottom and the top to relieve some of that pressure, because there is a big pressure buildup when that happens. You know, as long as it's well constructed, I don't think it's going to like pop your roof off or anything like that. If it was solid at the top, if you didn't have that gap for pressure to escape, depending on the size and the weight of it, I mean, it could maybe lift it up more easily. Yeah,
So the gap is probably a good idea.
I would think so. Yes.
And then one other question, talk about the long overhang.
Mm-hmm.
I've always had a problem with those overhangs of getting a decent wind, a decent seal there. In this climate, the temperature extremes are not bad, it doesn't, well, the cold stuff doesn't matter. But I'm doing a 1.5 to 2 foot overhang on the south side because of solar conditions.
Sure. You want the shade?
You didn't mention that here. What's your definition of a long overhang that's gonna cause a wind
few inches, like more than 6 inches, I'm thinking. And have you already framed this out?
Well, this particular one I'm now living in, there's been several that have.
Okay.
There may still, there's not supposed to be another room, but there may be. But it's a matter of, on the south side of the house, around here, 32 degrees latitude roughly, if I have a 1.5 foot overhang, and my windows, the bottom of the windows, the solar windows are about 18 inches up, that has.
Creates an awning effect, yeah.
And that shade is so noticeable, even right now, on the side with the little bit of an awning and the side without. That little bit of shade, I'm a skeptic, but that little bit.
It does make a difference, sure. Yeah, and for the ceiling problem, there is a way you can get around that. So instead of creating the overhang with your roof rafters, you saw your rafters off at the wall line, so they're flush to the wall, and you sheathe right over that continuously, and then you make a rain screen on your roof with flat 2x4s, and those 2x4s run past the wall line to create the soffit. Yeah.
The ladder rack on some houses. In this particular climate, that ceiling didn't seem like such a big problem. But my real, here, the big concern is the sun.
Sure.
And wondering, is it better to leave it off because the wind's that big to deal? Or I'm thinking.
Are you at like a? See, I'm at a high elevation. I'm at 4,600 feet.
Not high around here, I'm at 45.
So you don't get huge temperature swings?
Okay, I'm comparing this to back east.
Okay, I got you. Okay. You don't get like long-term extreme cold. Yeah, okay, I got you.
Okay. I did live in upstate New York for 5 years.
I was born in Buffalo, New York. Nice to meet you. Oh, yes, sir.
I too believe that the wind is an invisible enemy that must be stopped.
All right. Awesome.
Anyway, I was thinking that we want to build a North Dome variety of domes and have an inner courtyard to fight this invisible enemy.
Sure.
Are there any pitfalls or anything? Is this going to be an effective bastion?
Yeah, so what I'm doing with that concrete block wall around my house is creating a courtyard. I should have put more photos. So I kind of have like a horseshoe-shaped house, as people often, and then that wall will complete it to form the courtyard. It helps, but it's not perfect. I wouldn't think like, oh, it'll never be windy in this area. But no, it will make a difference, for sure. I mean, you're still going to get, winds falling from above, and you can only build so high, and I don't think it would make much difference, but no, it'll help, yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a house with a 10-foot overhang around the entire house. So besides wind breaks, how can I increase the roof load capacity so that the roof does not get torn up?
You said a 10-foot overhang?
Yes.
So I assume this will be fastened to like a vertical support
Oh, of
beams.
course. Yeah. Concrete.
Yeah, make sure that those are securely fastened. Make sure everything is fastened very, very, secure and tightly. Yeah, that would be my best advice. And also, I mean, you can always consult an engineer.
Yeah.
Yeah, which that's what you really should do is just.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
But wind breaks would be a #1 choice? As far as
Yes.
that's concerned?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, I assume you're doing these like super long overhangs, so you have like a shaded porch area to sit.
Right.
But it won't be pleasant when it's windy. So you probably want to set up some windbreaks. Anybody else? Yes.
Two-part question. When you did the 4 vents in the floor, where did you draw the air from? And was it better when you did it that way versus the cross ventilation?
It's not better than the cross ventilation. Now, to explain this, but I'm glad you asked that. So my tiny house sits on a open crawl space that I eventually skirted with large rocks. So sunlight never hits under the house, so the ground is always cool under there. When the air flows under it, it cools down. That creates the cooler air. It's not really cold. The cooler air that comes up and pushes the hot air out. And then in the winter time, I'll usually actually close 1 or 2 of those, because in the winter that kind of stuff can backfire on you. It's called the stack effect.
you will have plenty of cold air to displace the hot air in your house, and it'll just go wee right out the top. But yeah, that's how I did that.
So with shipping containers, do you recommend those also be mounted to some secure, like cement footer, or?
I have a 40-foot high cube. It weighs like something like 8,000 pounds empty.
Yeah.
It's just sitting on a gravel bed. It's never budged. And so now if you start like doing major modifications, like some people will take it like just down to the frame. You know, depending how much you like cut it up and take out and change the weight of it. But no, because I mean those things are, and they're really engineered extremely well because they're designed to sail across the ocean.
Right.
And be stacked up like super high, and you know. So I mean, no, you don't have to like tie that to the ground. If you're stacking them and going up significantly in height, you might want to think 2 of them. Yeah, I'd consult an engineer if you're really unsure about it. Yeah, but they're so heavy, and there are ways you can tie them together when you stack them. I think you would probably be just fine. So my wife's parents built a very tall shipping container house on the coast of Florida. They were the people who had their roof torn off, but the rest of the house didn't go anywhere. Yeah. Anybody else? Is that it? All right, thank you very much.